Shalom, beloved. My name is Ms. HiSmith, and I'm so glad that you've decided to join me here for part 11 of the APA Apology Response Series. Now, beloved, if you were not aware, back in February of 2021, the American Psychological Association, known as the APA, distributed a public apology to people in communities of color for the part they played in promoting, perpetuating, and failing to challenge racism, racial discrimination, and human hierarchy in the U.S. So, in this episode, we'll begin specifically where I quote, "Whereas this framework for understanding the 4 levels of racism recognizes that racism is woven into the fabric of the historical origins of the U.S. and its territories, and has become integral to the functioning of its core institutions and organizations." Close quote. So, racism has deeply influenced the historical origins of the U.S. and its territories in several profound ways. Number 1, colonialism and indigenous displacement. European settlers displaced indigenous peoples from their ancestral lands through treaties, violence, and forced removals. This systemic disposition was justified by racist ideologies that deemed indigenous cultures inferior. Efforts to assimilate indigenous populations included establishing boarding schools aimed at eradicating indigenous languages and cultures. Number 2, through slavery and enslavement. Enslaved Africans were forced and brought to the Americas to be subjected to brutal conditions. Racist ideologies were developed to justify their enslavement and dehumanization. Legal and social structures. Slavery was institutionalized through laws and social norms that defined enslaved people as property rather than human beings, entrenching racial hierarchies. Number 3, through segregation and Jim Crow laws. Racial segregation. After the Civil War, Jim Crow laws enforced racial segregation in public facilities, education, and housing, creating a racially stratified society. Discrimination. These laws codified racial inequalities, impacting economic opportunities and social mobility for Black Americans. Number 4, immigration policies and exclusion. Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. This act was one of the first federal laws to target a specific racial group, barring Chinese laborers from entering the U.S. and affecting their communities. Nativism. Throughout U.S. history, various groups, including Irish, Italian, and Eastern European immigrants, faced discrimination and exclusion based on racial and ethnic prejudices. Number 5, colonial territories and imperialism. Territorial expansion. The acquisition of territories such as Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines involved racial justifications for imperialism and the subjugation of non-white populations. Colonial administration. Racial hierarchies were often embedded in the governance of these territories, impacting their social and economic structures. Number 6, legal and institutional racism, specifically voting rights. Discriminatory practices such as literacy tests and poll taxes were used to disenfranchise Black voters and maintain white supremacy. Economic inequality. Laws and policies perpetuated racial disparities in wealth, education, and employment opportunities. These elements illustrate how racism has been embedded in the foundational structures and policies of the U.S., affecting the lives of marginalized communities throughout history. Beloved, racism has become integral to the functioning of the U.S., its core institutions and organizations in several critical ways. Number one, through the legal and judicial systems. Discriminatory laws, where historical laws such as the Black Codes and Jim Crow laws institutionalize racial segregation and inequality. Although these laws have been repealed, their legacy continues to affect the legal system. Next is sentencing disparities. Racial biases in sentencing contribute to disproportionate incarceration rates for people of color, especially Black and Latino individuals. Studies show that racial minorities often face harsher sentences compared to white counterparts for similar offenses. Number two, the education system. Unequal resources. Schools in predominantly Black and Latino neighborhoods often receive less funding and resources compared to those in predominantly white areas. This contributes to disparities in educational outcomes and opportunities. Disciplinary practices. Racial disparities in school discipline, such as higher suspension and expulsion rates for Black students, reinforce educational inequalities and push students out of the educational system. Number three, economic institutions. Employment discrimination. Racial biases in hiring, promotion, and wage practices contribute to significant economic disparities. People of color, particularly Black and Latino individuals, often face barriers to equal employment opportunities and fair wages. The wealth gap. Systemic racism has led to disparities in wealth accumulation. Historical practices such as redlining and discriminatory lending have prevented people of color from building generational wealth. Number four, healthcare system. Access and quality. Racial and ethnic minorities often experience lower quality of healthcare and less access to medical services. Disparities in health outcomes, such as higher rates of certain diseases among marginalized groups, are linked to both systemic and individual biases. Implicit bias. Healthcare providers may hold implicit biases that affect their treatment decisions, contributing to unequal care and health outcomes. Number five, the criminal justice system. Policing practices. Racial profiling and biased policing practices disproportionately target people of color, leading to higher rates of arrest and police violence. The use of excessive force and discriminatory practices in policing further perpetuate racial injustice. The prison industrial complex. The growth of the private prison industry and the criminalization of certain behaviors have exacerbated racial disparities in incarceration rates. Number six, political institutions. Voter suppression. Historical and ongoing practices such as gerrymandering
and voter ID laws disproportionately affect communities of color, limiting their political power and representation. Representation. There is often a lack of racial diversity in political offices and decision making positions, which can lead to policies that do not adequately address the needs and concerns of marginalized communities. And number 7, media and cultural representation. Stereotyping. Media portrayals often perpetuate racial stereotypes and reinforce negative biases, affecting public perception and reinforcing systemic racism. Cultural erasure. The contributions and histories of marginalized racial groups are frequently underrepresented or misrepresented in mainstream narratives, affecting cultural understanding and recognition. These systemic and institutionalized forms of racism are deeply embedded in the structures and functioning of U.S. society, influencing various aspects of life and perpetuating racial inequalities. Addressing these issues requires comprehensive reforms and a commitment to equity and justice across all sectors. Well, thank you so much, beloved, for spending this time with me, and I look forward to speaking with you on the next time. Shalom.